Today is Saturday, August 21st, 2020, which means it's Garaaga Saturday. One of you fiendlings, Mr. K, bought me a coffee and sent me an epistle regarding possible alternatives to Garaaga Saturday. I'm mulling them over for when we visit Daemons of Garaaga, which will happen one of these days. I don't have a lot to report, to be honest. I'm still recording Trident, I'm still writing Shipyards. Yes, it's moving at about 700 words to 1,000 words a day at present. And coding, it's the life, folks. Ups, downs, mania, depression. Speaking of, with everything that's going on in the world and the fact our lives have been turned upside down, it's easy to get stressed out and lose track of the fact you need to take care of yourself. Hopefully my soothing, dulcet voice is part of that regimen, but if not, find one. A regimen, I mean. Exercise, news fast, call a friend or have a video chat. Interact with other humans in a meaningful way. You'll feel better, I promise. Also, go take a goddamn shower, you stink. Oh, before I forget, there is one item of note. My YouTube channel hit the vaunted 1,000 subscribers, and now I'm getting inundated with Google spam on how to monetize my work. Regardless, reaching that milestone was pretty damn cool, and if you're one of the subscribers, thank you so much. Want to support the podcast? Keep it ad-free? Become a patron. Buy me a coffee. Subscribe. Buy an ebook now and then. Review it, and spread the Fiendmaster infection to your friends. All that said, this is going to be a long episode. In fact, they all are from here on out. So grab your time machine and let's go back to the library and see what Herodot is facing. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 14 of Legends of Garaaga.
Isaac popped a fig into his mouth, gnashed his teeth on the soft fruit, and moaned in pleasure. "You should try the figs. Good quality today." With a shrug, Herodot retrieved one of the fruits from a clay plate. He bit the end off and smiled. "Good," he whispered, and consumed the rest of it. Midday meal was held in the main assembly hall. The sound of conversation ebbed and flowed like the tides as discussions led to heated points and then subsided into quiet contemplation. Herodot stared down at the shank of lamb on his plate. He had only taken 2 bites. "Are you not hungry?" Herodot looked up at Isaac. "Guess not." "You must eat if you're going to finish translating your beloved Tupsoro." Isaac tore off a hunk of bread and chewed thoughtfully. Crumbs spilled from the corners of his mouth as he spoke. "What does our Akkadian poet have to say today?" Herodot pushed the plate away and tented his hands, forearms resting against the fine cedar table. "He's no longer a Tupsoro." Isaac ceased chewing and swallowed. He started to talk, coughed, and then drank a draught of water. "What do you mean by that? It's not the same scribe?" "It is, and it's not." "Riddles. I hate riddles. Explain, please." Herodot smiled. Isaac was the most literal man he'd ever met. Although older than himself, Isaac seemed to view the world through an impatient, petulant child's eyes. It was one of the things that had drawn them together. Tupsaro is now calling himself Triani of Gujaratine. Gujaratine? If I had the pronunciation correct. Something like that. What is Gujaratine? His birthplace, a small village east of Lothal. Isaac took another sip of water. If memory serves, Lothal was a port of sorts? Yes, Herodot agreed. Of sorts. Legends say it was the first of its kind, situated at the tributaries of the great Indus River. I thought Tupsoro was Akkadian. Evidently not. Herodot looked down at the lamb on his plate. His stomach growled, but not from hunger. Since reading Triani's first tablet that morning, he'd been unsettled. Does he say how he got there? I don't know yet. I haven't translated the entire group of tablets. I'm only 2 in, and he's written about Gujaratine, growing up in a great forest near an emerald river. Indus, Isaac said. Strange land. Yes, I may have to speak to Archelon and see if he knows where Gujaratine is, if it still exists. Well, if anyone knows, it'll be Archelon. Isaac turned around and surveyed the hall. He nodded to himself and then faced Herodot. I heard Cleodas wanted to speak with you privately. Herodo flushed. Yes, he did. Isaac waited a beat, and then he raised his hands, palms facing the ceiling. He wanted to speak with me about Akkad. I doubt that, Isaac muttered. What did he say? Just that he knew I was spending a lot of time on Akkadian translations. Herodo grunted, and that Akakio said I was the best scribe he had. Blasphemy, Isaac muttered. How dare Akakios make such an erroneous claim? Clearly I'm better than you. Crumbs of bread fell from the corners of his mouth. Clearly, Herodo agreed. So what else did he say? Herodo sighed. After the morning's lecture, Cleodas had waited for the other students to depart. When the lecture hall was empty, save for the head librarian and Herodo, the Greek strode forward and leaned on the lowest set of seats. 2 rows above him, Herodo could see light reflecting from the man's bald pate. Herodo shook the slightest bit. He'd never been alone in the presence of the man. Cleodas smiled as he tapped his fingers on the stone bench. Akakios tells me you are his best translator for Babylonian, Indus, and Aramaic. Herodo said nothing. He also tells me you are somewhat of an expert on the Akkadian religions. The young scribe blushed. Well, boy, what have you been translating? His voice came out in a cough. He cleared his throat and tried to stop quivering. I've been working through tablets from an Akkadian scribe. The old Greek chuckled. A scribe translating a scribe. And does this scribe have a name? He calls himself Tupsoro of Akkad. Doesn't that mean scribe? Yes, sir. Herodo cleared his throat again. It is the only name he gives. Interesting. Cleodas peered up at the ceiling. These walls, this place, were all made for people like us, Herodo. Herodo followed the old man's eyes. Frescoes were emblazoned on the high ceiling. Egyptian, cuneiform, Sanskrit, Aramaic, and Greek words flowed out from its center. All said the same thing. History is knowledge. Science is knowledge. Art is knowledge. In all things, know. Alexander commissioned the library, Cleodas said as his eyes turned back to Herodo's. The story goes that he wanted a place for all civilizations, for all peoples. Yes, sir. All that is here is for all, Cleodas' eyes hardened. Even Jews. Anger stirred in his belly. Herodo was used to the slurs, but somehow hearing them from the head librarian made it more biting. Even Jews, Herodo agreed through clenched teeth. Your Tupsoro, what does he say about Akkad? He describes market days, the endless war in the outer kingdoms, and the influx of merchants up and down the river. Nothing else? Herodo shrugged. Not thus far. He writes of a great flood that killed many and led to higher levels being built on some of the ziggurats. When would that have been? I'm not sure, sir. I haven't been able to pinpoint when he lived. Pity, Cleodas said. The Greek walked away from the bench and toward the center of the floor. You seem to show interest in the story of Philus. Indeed, sir. Akakios never mentioned such a tale. I doubt Akakios is even aware of it. If I may ask, sir, how did you hear of it? Cleodas smiled. I too was once a scribe, Jew, though I focused mainly on Hieratic and Aramaic. He chuckled. You seem surprised. I am, sir. I didn't... You didn't think I studied the Jews? No, sir. I find the Jewish customs strange, Herodo. I find their history far more interesting. Although I, of course, have no belief in Yahweh any more than Zeus. Herodo gulped. I am sorry. I didn't mean to blaspheme. Herodo said nothing. Philus' scroll was one of the original items sent to the library before its completion. At least that's what I think. Difficult to tell, but based on the other effects cataloged near it, I can only assume it was sent shortly after Alexander's death. Those items are protected by the guard. Indeed, Cleodas said. The Ptolemies are very protective of those works.
Even now, 3 of the royal guards surround the effects at all times. One must get permission from the head librarian to study them, and none of the material is allowed out of the room. But,
Cletus whispered, his eyes smiling with delight.
Some scribes made copies of those works so they might be studied outside the hallowed halls.
Herodotus shook his head. I thought copying those works was
Forbidden? Of course it is,
Cletus laughed.
We can't have the entire world knowing what a bastard Alexander was.
A copy exists of Philus's tale?
Would you like me to bring it to you for your amusement?
Very much so, sir.
Good,
Cletus said. He rubbed a finger against his temple, massaging it.
Someone needs to keep those stories alive, especially if Ptolemy loses. Who knows what that barbarian Caesar will do?
The man's cheeks had gone red, and he seemed to waver on his feet. You don't look well, sir.
Perhaps when you're my age, you'll understand what it is to be old.
The Greek shook his head as if to clear it, and then regained his composure.
I have kept you long enough, young man. Get to work.
Sir, Herodotus replied. Cletus turned and left the room. Even Cletus wasn't above breaking the library's rules. In fact, the man had looked pleased with himself. Isaac nodded as Herodotus finished the tale. You better watch that old man. Isaac swung his head around in a show of checking who was in earshot. I hear he buggers the serving boys, Isaac said through a cupped hand. Herodotus shook his head. Greeks, he whispered. Isaac laughed. Yes, and where would we be without them? Well, I'd still be starving in the temple. Doubtful. More than likely you'd be a rent boy. This fascination you have with buggery worries me. Yahweh will be most displeased. Isaac shrugged. With all the terrible things going on in this city, I doubt I even rate attention. The older scribe drank from his copper cup and tapped his fingers against it. Did you hear the fighting last night? I hear it every night. No, I mean, did you listen? By the time I entered my cell, Herodotus said, I was too tired to do anything but sleep. Isaac studied him for a moment. You don't look as though you slept at all, my friend. Something happened? Bad dreams, Herodotus said quietly. Ptolemy's men are getting closer to the palace, closer and closer still. Soon they'll be right out our front door. When that happens, do you think those centurions are going to continue protecting us? We have nothing to fear from Ptolemy. Perhaps not, Isaac agreed, but there will be bloodshed, and a lot of it. Nothing to me. Perhaps not. Will you stop saying that? Perhaps not, Isaac said in a grim voice. Herodotus reached over the table and hit him on the shoulder, and the two broke into laughter. What I mean is the library survives no matter who is in power. I know, Isaac said. I just wish they'd hurry up so I can return to my humble hovel in the city. Humble hovel. That was Isaac's phrase for the nearest whorehouse. How many commandments do you break when you go there? Isaac leered. As many as I can. Herodotus blushed. A bell rang. The two men turned to the front of the hall. Cletus stood in grim silence, waiting for the room to quiet. Conversation stopped. Drinks were placed back on tables. Midday meal was suddenly silent.
It is time, gentlemen, to return to your work. May the rest of your day be productive.
The diminutive Greek bowed to the hall, turned, and disappeared through the nearest arch. The room remained silent as the hall's inhabitants rose from their tables and filed out through the arches. Herodotus wasn't certain, but he thought he'd heard Isaac say, pizzle. The library was a large building containing many halls, rooms, and studios. Stone and marble columns, adorned with gilt gold, frescoes, and friezes, were everywhere. At each winter's solstice, the head librarian chose 3 artists from those in residence to add an adornment of their choice to the library. Whether column, ceiling, or wall, the chosen 3 were given 22 sunsets to finish their contribution. Archelon, the great maker of maps and historian of place, had been among the chosen 10 times. The Hall of Maps was his domain, and no artist dared profane his sanctuary. The hall's ceiling was painted and etched with great, dark, rugged mountains, grainy deserts, and forests of green. Each time he was chosen, he added a new layer to his own refuge. When the old man's tenure finally ended, his successor, and all those to follow, would have to live with Archelon's visions. Just as history was sacrosanct, so were the library's adornments. Once a fresco, frieze, sculpture, or painting was added, it would remain until the library crumbled to dust. Once he began reading the new tablets, the mention of Triani's home of Gujarratine had stuck in Herodot's mind. The descriptions of the forest, the green river, the great hills to the east, painted a picture he desired to see. At second break, Herodot had asked Akakios for permission to see Archelon. Akakios had snickered. "If you think that senile genius can help you, please do. But remember, Herodot, you're not here to annotate the history. You were here to translate it. Not correct it, not question it, just translate it." The words had rankled him. He owed Akakios his position at the library. The stalwart grim Greek had been responsible for pulling him out of the Jewish orphanage and changing his life. But the older Herodot became, the more he realized just how closed-minded his patron was. Herodot stood at the hall's entrance, his eyes staring up at the arched ceiling. The mapmaker truly was a great artist.
"What can I do for you, scribe?"
Herodot leveled his eyes. Archelon twirled his beard. The man's face was grim and uninviting, but his old brown eyes sparkled. "Afternoon, sir. My name is—"
"Herodot,"
Archelon finished. The old Greek smiled.
"Yes, I know who you are, boy. Come."
He nodded and walked into the room as Archelon shuffled to a table along the wall. The old man groaned with effort as he sat upon the cedar table.
"To what do I owe this visit?"
"Thank you for allowing me—" The Greek waved a gnarled hand.
"You are one of the library's denizens, my son. All are welcome."
The Greek winked.
"Even Jews."
"Yes, sir."
"Maps, maps, maps,"
Archelon said as he pointed to the shelves of scrolls.
"Surely you came for a map?"
"I'm not sure," Herodot said.
"Not sure."
"I'm translating some Akkadian tablets, and a strange name came up." The old man chuckled.
"I believe Akkad and strange go hand in hand."
"Yes, sir."
"I take it this name belongs to a place?"
"No," Archelon said and looked up at the ceilings.
"Places belong to names. Yes, I like that better."
Herodot said nothing.
"What is this name?"
Gujarratine."
"That is not an Akkadian name, my son."
"No, sir." Archelon's eyes snapped back to Herodot's, his mouth set in a frown.
"Indus?"
"Yes, sir, I think so."
The
old man stroked his long beard.
"Do you have any other information?"
"Somewhere near Lothal?"
"Ah!"
Archelon yelled. He shuffled off the table, his bones creaked again, and he let out a little groan of pleasure.
"Lothal, Lothal, Lothal,"
the old man whispered as he walked toward the other side of the room.
"Follow me, boy, and I shall show you wonders."
Herodot did as he was bade, but walked with trepidation. The mapmaker was well respected, but most thought Archelon had gone mad years ago. The old man walked to a wall of cedar blocks. The honeycomb stretched over 5 men high toward the ceiling. Each slot contained a number of large scrolls. Herodot inhaled the scent of the timber. He loved that smell. The wood was not only fragrant, but helped preserve the papyrus.
"Boy!"
Archelon shouted in Egyptian. Herodot stiffened. The man's voice sounded like a bird being strangled. He turned as he heard footsteps from behind. A small child ran into the room. The boy was dressed in a white tunic with gold-colored fringes. The clean cloth made his skin look almost black. The newcomer bowed. Archelon didn't acknowledge his presence.
9 and 5. All of them.
The boy nodded, rose, and quickly walked to a corner of the large room. Herodot watched in fascination as the child pulled a long wooden post from the wall. Offset metal spikes jutted from either side. Grunting with exertion, the boy used 2 of the spikes as handles as he dragged the makeshift ladder to the cedar honeycomb.
9 and 5,
Archelon muttered. The boy pushed past Herido without apology. He struggled to raise the ladder against the wall. Herido leaned to help him, but the boy shot him an angry look. Confused, Herido withdrew. Another grunt, and the boy managed to pull the ladder flush against the shelves.
9 and 5,
the boy said in broken Greek, and then scrambled up the ladder. The wood creaked as it took his weight, but it held. When the boy reached the very top of the honeycomb, he slid his feet into the nearest hole and used his hands to grasp the top. He spider-walked his way to the 5th hole in the row. Straining and grunting, the brown-skinned boy reached a hand into the nook and pulled out an oblong cloth bundle.
If you would, Herido,
Archelon said. If I would...
Catch,
Archelon said. The boy dropped the scrolls. Herido gave a yelp of surprise but managed to get his sweaty hands beneath the package. A puff of dust rose from the cloth.
Another,
Archelon whispered. Herido moved his arms and caught the next load. 2 more dropped. He managed to keep them from falling to the floor, but nearly lost his balance on the last.
Done,
Archelon shouted in Egyptian. The boy nodded, reversed his spider walk to the ladder, and quickly made his way to the ground. He put his hands on the spikes as if to move the ladder.
Wait, boy.
He turned to Herido and took the topmost bundle from his arms.
Follow, scribe.
Archelon made his way to a large cedar table against the west wall. He pulled loose the papyrus string and gently unfurled the cloth. The bright gold scroll ends twinkled beneath the rays of sunlight that flowed through the hole in the ceiling.
Lay the rest over there.
Herido followed the old man's gnarled finger and deposited the other bundles in the table's far corner. The papyrus whispered as Archelon unrolled the large scroll. Once the map was unfolded, the old man smiled.
This map is old, my boy. Very, very old.
He turned to Herido.
And it's the wrong one.
He began the laborious process of rolling up the scroll and retying it. The old man reached across the table and grabbed the next bundle. He peered at it.
Perhaps,
he whispered. He studied faded Greek letters burned into the dingy cloth.
No.
Herido watched as Archelon began unpacking the next one. The sunlight filtering through the square in the ceiling wavered. Herido looked up and watched a cloud passing by. Excuse me, sir. How do you keep the room from filling with dust or water? Archelon turned, his face set in a grin.
My little boy over there climbs up on the roof and closes the hatch before nightfall.
Hatch?
Yes. When Ptolemy designed the map room, he made sure to provide us with natural light.
I've never seen any other hatches in the library. Archelon shook his head.
That's because those damn fools don't have any love for the sun. Say it damages the papyrus or some nonsense.
The old man handed 2 scrolls to Herido and started laying out the third.
So what if it does? I can always redraw a map. If I can't see the map, it's useless. Ah!
Sir?
This is better.
Archelon bent down to the table, his nose mere inches away from the scroll. Herido peered over his shoulder. The old man put his index finger on a smudge of brown above an oval shape of blue.
Do you know what that is, scribe?
Herido didn't answer.
That is Once a great empire, like Babylon. Now it's nothing, just like Babylon.
He turned to Herido.
This map does not show Babylon, and was some distance away from it, but you get the idea.
Yes, sir. The old man looked back down.
See this? This is the water that flows out from into the sea.
He dragged his index finger down an oblong shape of dull blue, surrounded by brown. The blue was nearly choked at its end, but trickled through into a large triangle that covered the rest of the map's left side.
I trust this map the most, young man. The old cartographers, if they can be called such, drew theirs from the memories and charts of uneducated barbarians, usually known as soldiers.
He winked at Herido.
But this map, he sighed, this is one of mine.
Meaning? Archelon stood as straight as he could, his vertebrae crackling like wet kindling.
Have you visited Akkad, young man?
Of course not, sir.
Why not?
Herodo swallowed. Because it no longer exists.
Ah,
The old man raised his index finger in front of Herodo's eyes.
yes, it does. Of course it does. The dying leave corpses. The corpses are eaten, chewed, covered in dirt and sand, hidden from us. But they still exist.
I don't...
How many of the dead do you think you stand upon, scribe?
Archelon raised his hands and looked around the hall.
Surely there were deaths in building this great library of ours. Egyptians laboring to raise slabs, to secure its foundation, to construct its walls, its ceiling, its roof. You cannot tell me we do not stand upon the dead and forgotten. If we dug through the bottom floor of stone and into the sand, I wonder what we would find. I wonder.
Herodo said nothing. Archelon's beard dripped with spittle. During the old man's oratory, his eyes had grown wild.
And so was Sumer and his children Akkad and Babylon, dead upon dead upon dead, stacked high in the stone temples, city walls, streets. So yes, young man, you could travel there. You could drift among the hulking corpses left behind, breathe in the scent of their decay, and imagine their long-dead majesty.
Archelon turned back to the map.
And it's something you should do one day, Herodo. To study is not as important as to live, and no one can know the world without seeing it.
Herodo cleared his throat.
Speak, young man. I'm not angry with you, merely passionate.
Archelon chuckled. This map is yours? The scribe said in a shaking voice.
Yes.
And you trust it?
Yes.
But you haven't been... Archelon's laugh sounded like a bird's dying screech.
I have been to Lothal. I traveled there in my younger days. Traveled with Romans.
Archelon wrinkled his nose.
Hugged the coast for days and days. We met the storms. We met the lightning of the gods. And I knew sickness I'd never imagined possible.
The old man's voice drifted into silence. The cartographer stood as still as a statue for a moment, his breathy wheeze the only sign of life. Sir? Archelon swung his head and stared at the scribe.
What was it we were talking about?
Mapping the coastline, sir. A wan smile appeared beneath the heavy beard.
Yes. Sorry, son, my mind wanders at times.
Herodo said nothing.
I mapped the coast with the Romans. We traveled all the way to Lothal.
He pointed back to the map.
Pomponius Mela and others contend that India begins up here.
Archelon pointed off the map.
They are wrong. India is far larger than Pomponius or those other fools think.
Have you traveled much of it?
No,
Archelon admitted.
But there are maps made by Alexander's soldiers and other explorers. While I doubt their accuracy, the maps all seem to agree that India starts much closer. Perhaps even here.
His gnarled index finger stabbed a point on the coastline. How can you be sure?
I can't. But I have spoken with the people of the Indus, including some tribes living near Lothal. There is no doubt in my mind the world is far larger than any of us guess.
Insane, Herodo thought. The man is clearly insane.
Here's Lothal, young man.
Archelon's finger hovered over a point on the coast. Greek letters spelled its name.
Do you see the tributaries? The rivers that span out? What did you call it?
Gujaratine.
Your Gujarat team was probably along one of these rivers. Most of the tribes and villages sprang up near them, although many were washed away by floods.
How do you know so much? Archelon grinned.
As I said, I've been there. Pomponius and his ilk draw their maps with Rome as the center of the known world. They hardly leave their precious domiciles. Too much work for the pampered.
The Akkadian scribe said it was a 5-day journey to Lothal from Gujaratine.
Along the river?
Herodo nodded.
Then it should be somewhere near here.
The old man's finger followed the edge of the river and stopped halfway up the blue line.
Probably no one there now.
Do you know of any who would have traveled that route? Archelon scratched his head.
No one in the library, certainly. I'd suggest you go to Ptolemy's private room and look there.
Cleotus suggested the same. The old man's grin faded.
Cleotus.
Archelon leaned forward.
You should be careful of that man,
he whispered.
He's his own creature. Always has been, and always will be.
Herodo wrinkled his brow. What do you mean, sir? He held a finger to his lips.
Watch. Listen. Speak as little as you need to, especially if he's taken an interest in your work.
Archelon turned back to the map.
This is my favorite map, young man. I was much younger when it was made. I'll never see Lothal again.
He slowly rolled up the scroll.
When you leave the library for good, my friend, travel. See these places and write about them.
He tied up the bundle and placed it with the others.
Is there anything else I can do for you?
Herodo shook his head. Archelon offered his withered hand. Herodo grasped it. They shook.
You are welcome here any time, my friend.